Before I begin, it's my privilege and my cultural responsibility to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land, the unceded land on which we stand today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and thank them for their tens of thousands of years of ongoing care and custodianship of this country, and extend those respects to all elders in particular and Aboriginal people that have come from around the country to Naarm here today. So I'm Adrian Sculthorpe. I'm a proud Palawa man, traditional custodian from Tasmania, and I'm the Deputy Secretary of the Aboriginal Justice Group in the Victorian Department of Justice and Community Safety. And that means it's my privilege to lead the Victorian Department of Justice's efforts to address overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in the justice system and improve outcomes for our people in the justice system. And also I get the privilege of leading our Stolen Generations reparations package and our efforts to increase our Aboriginal workforce across the Department of Justice and Community Safety, which aligns very closely with some of the purposes of Tawiri and being here today. So it's a real honour to have the opportunity to say a few words here at the National Indigenous Legal Conference, and especially with all these deadly Aboriginal legal professionals in the room. I'm both, one, feeling very uneducationally qualified because I am not a lawyer amongst so many law students and lawyers, but also genuinely inspired to see so many great people in this room. Many I don't know, many I do know from my years in justice, who are all fighting to improve justice outcomes for our mob. I have to particularly acknowledge Tawiri, the Indigenous Law Students and Lawyers Association of Victoria, for hosting this year's national conference, and the work of so many here today in Tawiri's continued growth, success and excellence. And the department is proud to have sponsored Tawiri from its inception, including help birth the idea for over the past 20 years as an initiative of our Victorian Aboriginal Justice Agreement, and proud to be able to support this year's conference. So the department funds Tawiri because we recognise the impact and importance of supporting Aboriginal law students and lawyers to thrive and to fulfil their aspirations within the law and beyond, and also because we know that the best people to lead initiatives that are successful and sustainable for Aboriginal people are Aboriginal people. And so we certainly know that has proven to be the case in many of our initiatives, but in Tawiri here today, which has become such a critical part of the Victorian legal and Aboriginal affairs sectors, and plays an important role in not only supporting Indigenous law students and lawyers, but also in truly changing the perceptions of the law and improving access to justice for our mob. I truly think Tawiri, through their work, are helping to define or redefine who and what the legal profession is here in Victoria, and also wanted to reflect that I've personally seen Tawiri's impact be much greater even than just the legal professional field. So many of our Victorian Aboriginal leaders across several sectors, including some you'll hear from over the following few days, have been members of Tawiri and gone on to be key leaders outside of those fields. The other thing I wanted to take the few moments to speak about here today is the Victorian Aboriginal Justice Agreement, AJA, as we call it, as it's unique and I think it's effective in improving Aboriginal justice outcomes and in furthering self-determination for our mob in the justice system. And it's also the vehicle through which we support Tawiri. So one of the grants from our AJA Community Grants program that we provide is Tawiri. There's about 116 other initiatives funded at the moment, and in total that grants program provides about $38 million per annum for organisations to deliver community-led initiatives that improve Aboriginal justice outcomes, and over 98% of that funding goes to Aboriginal organisations, because again, we know Aboriginal organisations are more effective and Aboriginal people do it better for Aboriginal people. It's also worth saying is the way I've just put it forward then might sound a bit like government funds Aboriginal organisations to do things. The approach that we have in Victoria is not that. It is a true partnership approach between Aboriginal community and government. And so one example of that in that grants program example is that it is our Aboriginal community partners that make the decisions about which grants get funded. And that is based on both the information available from the justice system, but also equally valuing the lived experience and wisdom of Aboriginal people in making those decisions. And that really is the premise, that partnership is really the premise of the whole Aboriginal Justice Agreement. It's a formal partnership signed by Aboriginal community leaders, signed by government ministers, and it was first launched back in 2000, so we're in year 24 of it now, and we're into the 4th iteration of the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. And in a national room like this, it might be challenged later, but we think it's the most enduring partnership between Aboriginal community and government anywhere in Australia across any sector. So how that partnership plays out is about true Aboriginal government partnership governance structures at statewide level, at regional level, at local level, and on the issues that matter most to Aboriginal people. And it means that Aboriginal voices are at the forefront of the design, the implementation and the monitoring across our justice system, and for holding government account for promises, for actions and for inactions. And that involvement is across the spectrum of the justice system, from a leading role in legislative change to advice on policing and corrections practice to, of course, like deep in the legal system itself, and including that our statewide network of Koori courts were an initiative of the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. And it also touches on, more than touches on, embeds all those underlying issues that impact in our mob being so incarcerated. So we actively work in partnership with health, with education, with child protection, and all the other sectors that contribute to overrepresentation. So I've told you that brief little story about partnership, a true partnership that has been going on for 24 years. And so the question is, does a long-term commitment to working in partnership with Aboriginal people to improve Aboriginal justice outcomes and further self-determination in the justice system, does it work? And there are lots of promising signs that it does. The main one I'd point to here in a national sense is, as many people would know, the National Agreement on Closing the Gap sets two justice targets for reducing incarceration rates of Aboriginal adults and Aboriginal youth. Those targets were set in 2019, and nationally the situation has got worse since 2019, and in many jurisdictions it has got worse. In Victoria, it has got better. The Closing the Gap agreement set reductions to be achieved by 2031. In Victoria, since 2019, we have already exceeded those targets, so we're 7 years ahead of schedule in meeting those agreements. And in terms of youth incarceration, our reduction has been more than double than what the national agreement sought by 2031. And you know, there are many individual initiatives like Tawiri that can prove their success. And we have an evaluation right at the moment of our Aboriginal Justice Agreement Phase 4 that will be finalised this month that will tell us more about those successes. But I can't stand up here and not talk about that there is much, much more that needs to be done in Victoria and across the nation to create a fairer justice system for our mob. So despite those successes that I spoke about in reducing Aboriginal incarceration rates, Aboriginal people here in Victoria, like everywhere else across the nation, are still shockingly overrepresented in our justice system. You know, and tragically at the pointy end, of those of us working in the justice system, we continue to have Aboriginal deaths in custody in the Victorian justice system, including tragically 7 of our mob who have passed in the corrections system since 2020. And so I know a lot of it's the reason you're here, but I just wanted to say bluntly, it's unacceptable that Aboriginal people are profiled, discriminated against and treated unfairly within the justice system. It's unacceptable that overrepresentation that has been here since colonisation continues to this day. It's unacceptable that Aboriginal people experience worse outcomes at every measurable point of the justice system. And of course, it's absolutely unacceptable that more than 30 years after the Royal Commission that we still have Aboriginal people dying in custody, here or anywhere in Australia. So the importance of the work we do, the importance of the work we do, I mean we people in this room, is still urgent, is still stark. The fight for justice, the fight for survival must continue. There is so much that needs to be done and needs to be done urgently. And we know, and I say we as Aboriginal community, but also in this case as Victorian government, know the only way that lasting and tangible change will happen is through greater levels of Aboriginal self-determination. And that's why it's such an exciting time to have the National Indigenous Legal Conference here in Victoria, because there are some very promising developments in that space. Next year we will be entering the development of Aboriginal Justice Agreement Phase 5. As many people would know, right now we are in the process of the URUK Justice Commission, of course the first formal truth-telling process about the experiences of Aboriginal people since colonisation. And URUK's initial report, URUK for Justice, focused on the justice system and child protection system, again showing the priority that those systems hold and the urgent need for change. And really excitingly, we're on the verge of treaty negotiations here in Victoria. Many people would know, but only about a week ago we had the ceremonial opening of our treaty negotiations, which has been a long journey to get to those points. So they're all landmark moments. They all bring the opportunity of truly transformational change that is needed for our people in the justice system and beyond. And really excited that I know over the next few days of this conference you'll be hearing directly from the First Peoples Assembly about treaty, and the Treaty Authority, and directly from URUK commissioners on Thursday. So in closing, I just really wanted to wish everyone here well for this conference, reiterate our continuing support for Tawiri and the Aboriginal legal sector. I really hope that this conference will lead to the sharing of knowledge, of new ideas, of perhaps new friendships and new initiatives that will shape the future of justice and the legal profession here and nationally for First Nations people. I guess everyone's probably feeling this away by seeing a room of this size and so many dedicated people working, but when you stand up here in particular and you look out at these faces of committed people that are here to do this hard work, it really is quite inspirational. It's the level of change that we need. And I reflect on that it's not very long ago we couldn't have had a national Indigenous legal conference like this, or it would have been a much, much smaller conference because we didn't have a national Indigenous legal sector to come to that conference. I think that is a real achievement that should be celebrated. And so just say thank you for letting me say a few words. Please everyone make the most of this opportunity, and thank you for your ongoing commitment to our mob and being here to make further improvements. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. A big thanks from me to Perry Wandin for the welcome to country. It's always fantastic to experience that. They have a common theme, but each one is different, and I learn each time I participate in that ceremony. So thank you for that. I'd also like to acknowledge some of the other important people in the room, including you, Adrian, and also the Tarwiri Committee, and congratulate them on what a fantastic turnout, particularly President Andrew Williams, Art Pitchford, the Vice President, Candice Jackson, Secretary, Anton D'Amico, Treasurer, Neve Whitford, and Tegan Cochrane. Well done. My organisation recently hosted a conference of legal regulators, which is a lot more interesting than it sounds. So I know how much work goes into running a conference. I can tell you next week will be a great week. You'll be very, very relieved. So I too want to acknowledge that we are privileged to be here on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I want to pay respects to elders past and present, and pay my respects to all First Nations peoples that are here in the room today. I'm always grateful for the ongoing care for this magnificent landscape and country, and I acknowledge the unbroken connection to country, culture and land. Sovereignty has never been ceded. I am honoured to live and work on the Birrarung's banks. I want to acknowledge that I am the descendant of colonisers and the beneficiary of colonisation. My grandmother, my mother and I were born on Wurundjeri country on the banks of the Murray River in South Australia, and that's where the ashes of my mother are now scattered. I'm very honoured to be here today to mark the 17th National Indigenous Legal Conference, and thank Tarwiri for the opportunity to speak to you very briefly today. Tarwiri is such an important organisation and plays such a key role in the Victorian legal sector, supporting First Nations legal professionals to connect, collaborate and build capacity to achieve their career aspirations. These kinds of networks like Tarwiri and conferences and the other things that it does are so important for building these connections, to share best practice and to support one another. These kinds of activities help us First Nations peoples and your allies like me reach our full potential and inspire the next generation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal professionals to flourish in the legal sector. So as the regulator of the legal profession in Victoria, the Legal Services Board and the Legal Services Commissioner are incredibly proud to support the event. As someone who plays an important role in the legal sector in Victoria, I think it's important that I acknowledge the profound harm and systemic injustice that engagement with the justice system and its lawyers has caused and continues to cause First Nations peoples, their families, children and communities. Too often First Nations peoples are disproportionately affected by both the lack of access and unequal treatment or worse in the justice and legal system. This is a terrible wrong and it must be addressed. As we reflect through the truth-telling process and the Iraq Justice Commission's report on the impact of the harm caused by discriminatory laws and policies, we also hold space and indeed celebrate the remarkable resilience and success of First Nations peoples in the face of the impacts of colonisation. In the light of that, I'm very proud to support Treaty for Victoria, and I hope that as the treaty negotiations begin, it will lead to transformative changes in the justice system, grounded in transferring decision-making power and resources to First Nations peoples. So the Legal Services Board and Commissioner, as I mentioned, is the regulator of the legal profession in Victoria. So those of you that want to practice here will have very little to do with me. Once a year you'll get a practicing certificate, and then I'm sure you won't need to talk to me ever again, which is great. But we are also, at the Legal Services Board, a funder of lots of activity in the justice sector in Victoria. So, as you've heard, we're very proud to support this conference, and we're very proud to support a number of First Nations-led organisations, as well as others that provide targeted services in partnership with First Nations peoples and communities. This year, our grant round supported a number of projects at around $2.5 million for those kinds of projects. We're also providing funding to VALS, the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, to develop a cultural capability framework for Victorian lawyers, something that is sorely needed. And they're doing this important work in collaboration with Victoria Legal Aid and the Law Institute of Victoria. We're also funding a number of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations in regional Victoria, including the Yalum Yalum project in Horsham, which is developing restorative justice programs to divert people away from the criminal justice system. We're also working with VALS and JIRA to develop a First Nations cultural capability training program for lawyers in Victoria. As the CEO of the board and the Commissioner, I can't expect the profession to be further along the cultural capability journey than my own organisation. And so we have been working over the last several years to uplift our own cultural capability and to model the sorts of practices that we want to see in the profession. We worked with Aboriginal owned and managed consultancy NJAC, not just a consultancy, such a great name, on building the cultural capability of our own staff through cultural awareness training, which was centred on truth-telling. It began with a full day of truth. It was a very profound experience actually for my team. I'm very proud to say that everyone in the organisation attended that training, and we continue to require that of everyone who works in our organisation. Off the back of truth, we launched our, our inaugural Reconciliation Action Plan, and we are continuing that truth and reflection journey. I'm really deeply committed to this work, not just at my own organisation, but across the broader Victorian legal sector. It's my strong belief and also my experience that Aboriginal culture and law offer valuable lessons for the legal profession. The knowledge and skills of First Nations people strengthens the sector, makes it more adaptable, vibrant and better positioned to serve and support the community. There's so much to learn, and I'm constantly amazed by the generosity with which First Nations peoples engage with the justice sector. Recently, I had the great privilege to attend a ceremonial sitting at the Supreme Court of Victoria, at which Andrew spoke very well. It was a profound experience to sit in an institution which has been so involved in marginalisation and dispossession and indeed injustice for First Nations people. I was particularly moved when the sitting opened and closed, and the Chief Justice, whose court it is, stood back to allow the First Nations elders to come in and to leave first. A very profound symbolic recognition of the place of First Nations peoples in our justice system. So while there are many things for us to be angry about and to want to see change, moments like that make me think that change can happen. So as I finish, I really want to wish you all a fantastic experience over the next 3 days. The program looks amazing, and I'm really disappointed that I can't stick around, but there's quite a few of my staff here, so heads up, I'm expecting a full report on the sessions that you go to. So don't all go to the same session, because you're going to need to divide and conquer having a look at how fat that program is. Have a great time at the gala dinner tomorrow night as you mark the outstanding achievements of First Nations lawyers in the National First Nations Law Awards ceremony. Thank you.